All right, I'm going to pull it up real quick so we can see any comments or anything else here. Almost there. Okay. All right, man. We are live, ready to
Okay.
rock and roll.
Awesome.
Welcome, everyone, to the next broadcast of My Business World Live. We're on Facebook and YouTube, so we're following the comments on Facebook primarily. So just so you're aware, if you're going to want to comment in or have questions or anything else, feel free to do so on Facebook, and we will get to what we can. But we've got a couple of things to talk about today. I am your host, one of your hosts, Billy Bush. Brandon Allen, of course, joining me as well.
Yay.
Mr. CEO himself. And all right, let's pull this sucker up. Okay, so today, getting started, let's just talk about an update that we're kind of seeing and hearing from clients and others around some of the benefits, government financing, the PPP loans, which is what, payroll protection program, or
Yep. You
power
got it.
play pineapple. So anyway,
Yep.
so some of the things that were happening there, if money's actually being distributed yet, what people can expect, should they be applying for all of it? We talked briefly about a little bit of it last week, but obviously it's a pretty fluid, dynamic situation. So as of right now, I'll let you. What have you heard, I guess, and where are things at from your viewpoint in regards to those?
Yeah, I know for most people, they probably get tired of hearing about this because, I'm getting emails from my attorneys, accountants, you name it, on, what's going on right now. But we also still get a lot of questions on a daily basis on what's happening right now. What are you guys seeing? So just wanted to let you guys know that we do have people that we're seeing who are getting funding. They're getting the funds. Their loan has been processed. It's gone through. But we're also seeing that for some people, like I know people who bank with Wells Fargo, they ran into a situation where they were money applications that,
You there?
that
Just a second. You're
just a capitalization put those through.
I think you're getting a little bit stuttery there, Brandon. Hold on.
Now, and that people are receiving funding already. Now, this is a bureaucratic process, and I don't want to just I don't want to bang on the government because I think that's a really low hanging piece of fruit there to just bang on a lack of efficiency and effectiveness, like from the government as a whole. So everything that runs through government is a little bit slower, but this is also just any large organization, right? I don't care if you're in the corporate world or in the private or the public sector, you're going to run into inefficiencies because that process has to move through now several
Mm-hmm.
layers before things are finalized and before things are done. So it's the process is a little bit slow. People are starting to receive money. So if you've put an application in, make sure the one thing is like my bank at least has now at least told me that, hey, we received your application, we're processing it. But that took 5 days for my bank to actually tell me that. So be patient with the process. But if you haven't heard anything from your lender, you may want to check in and ask them what's going on. And like I said before, we work with some brokers in this space. So if you want to work with someone who has access to multiple lenders in this process, that may be a good idea. You can run more than one application through the process. At least that's what I'm
Hmm.
understanding. I hope I'm not wrong about that. But from what I understand, you can look into multiple options to see what you can and can't get. So don't hesitate to look at that. But I do know that a lot of places are restricting your ability to apply, particularly for the PPP loan, if you're not a current business
Mm.
customer. So you may run into some issues there, but still look into what lending options exist out in the marketplace, because there are other options if your bank is either slow or having a hard time getting the ball rolling on things. But right now, people are getting funding, so be patient. Check in with your banker if you haven't heard from them at this point in time. And if you want other options, don't hesitate to reach out to us and let us know.
Absolutely. Well, and also watch out for, I mean, when you're doing that shopping, watch out for scams as well, because that's kind of amped up in a
Yep.
lot of ways where,
Yep.
people are posing as a bank that can help you with your deal or whatever it is. And so obviously, looking for the more reputable sources, or going through a broker that, has vetted their sources and that sort of thing is definitely going to be a big piece of that as well.
Yep.
And anything like this, I feel like, it's better to ask forgiveness than permission, because no one knows what's going on. So, can you put in multiple applications? I say yes until they say no, until something is a lot clearer that it's not going to work. A lot of these types of variables, there's going to be a lot of, oh, I wasn't aware of that. So it's not like, oh, you're now punished for doing this. It's the same thing like if people that are applying for the PPP loans as well as unemployment. I mean, I'm like, you can throw both lines out there. You're just going to ultimately have to probably shut one down, right? You get the PPP loan and go that route. You got to stop with the unemployment route or whatever other method that you're exploring for temporary closure and stuff. So for the most part, throw the line out there and then see what happens. But it's good to hear that some are actually getting funding. So that's I know applications just open up. I mean, how rapidly they're having to move on something like this, even as a government, it seems like it's quite phenomenal that it even gets this far this quick. When you really think about it,
Yep.
it's like the complexity of doling out that kind of money is pretty intense. So that's a big piece of that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, they've moved much faster into coming up with solutions for people in this typical situation than they did in 2008, 2009, where quite frankly, they had a whole lot more of a runway
Yeah.
to see what was going to happen. And they didn't respond to that very quickly at
Yep.
all, almost until it was too late. And so now at least I feel like people are trying to get in front of the situation and work through that as best they can. And one thing I've been seeing, like today specifically, around news on this topic is, hey, don't apply for this if you don't need it.
Yeah.
Just make sure you really need it. And here's the deal: 16 million people are unemployed in the last 3 weeks. 16 million people. That's more than the last financial crisis already. And we're not done
Yep.
yet. So my whole thought process with this is, you're likely going to need it. I mean, if you have a business that's a service-based business, you may be okay
Yeah.
now, but you're going to need it at some point in time, because look, pretty soon that money is going to stop flowing the way that it was
Yep.
before, and that's going to start to grind commerce to a halt. That's going to create some issues down the road. I don't think we're not done with the issues that are going to come up. So, look, if you think you might need it, I
Yep.
would do it. I mean,
Absolutely.
there's plenty of money, and the reason why I say this is I looked at this. This was yesterday. I haven't looked at what it is today. There's still plenty of money available, and they're talking about adding more money to the fund going
Yeah.
forward. So uh, the whole thing about like we're going to run out of money for people who really need it, I don't know that that's actually going to be the case. So if you think you might need it, I would err on the side of caution.
Absolutely. Well, it's like anything else. Don't wait until you're out of food to decide to go find food. You know what I mean? Like it's and you never should be looking for financing when you need it. And you're desperate. I mean, that's obviously in this case, they're going to approve. Normally that would be the denial is when you need it. Like it's always the classic game, right? But either way,
Yep.
it's still prudent to move when you to see the writing on the wall, or at least prepare for the future in some sense, right? Prepare for the worst,
Yep.
hope for the best. You may as well apply, and then you can kind of figure out the details later. So it only makes sense for sure.
Yeah.
Excellent, awesome. So with that, as far as moving past some of those benefits and some of the things that are happening on that front with your business today, with any small business owner today, primary actions that we should be taking, and what some thoughts around some of those types of things. What's a big key action again that people need to really be diving into and focusing on?
Yeah, I mean, as a shameless plug, I think we're going to put together a video series. I'm going to put a series of Brandon minutes together. So if you guys haven't seen the Brandon Minute Show, it's on YouTube. That kind of goes through this because I think there's some primary things that we can work on, especially for people like Dennis and other people who've had their business just completely shut
Yeah.
down, right? Where it's like there's really not a lot they can do. For some sectors that we work with or industries that we work with, it's not like they have a lot of time on their
Yep.
hands, but if you do, there's some things that you can look at. And so marketing is just one of those things that come to mind, Billy. So like I know marketing is a passion of yours and a place that you like to play in.
Absolutely.
And what I think is what the first thing as an entrepreneur is that marketing can be really overwhelming because there's a lot that goes into marketing. There's a lot of ways that you
Hmm.
can market. There's a lot of channels that you can deliver a message. I mean, even finding out what your message is a challenge, right? I mean, that can be a years long endeavor where you spend a lot of time just really trying to figure out and dial in, like, what is the unique message of my business? Like, and how do I connect that to the type of customer that wants to buy from me? And so you may be thinking right now, well, marketing isn't one of those things that necessary because people aren't buying. But the reality is that if people aren't buying your product and service now, they will be in the future. And so this is a great opportunity for you to expand your reach in your marketplace, to get your message in front of the right people at the right time. And this is an opportunity for you to really be a player in the market, because a lot of people, what happens in uncertain financial times is this is where scarcity rears its ugly head, right? So I've said this a ton of times that when we're in scarcity, right, we make decisions primarily based off of money.
Mhm.
Like money is the only deciding factor. Like, should I have this or should I not, right? And if we get too crazy with it, it's like, hey, sell your car, get a bus pass, it's cheaper,
Yeah.
right? We can go all the way down the
Yep.
line to making the most base level decisions for ourselves based primarily on money. Now, you may add other factors into the mix when you talk about selling your car and getting a bus pass, because you realize, oh, well, there's some things that I really need my car for, and here's what they
Hmm.
are. So maybe I don't sell my car. But marketing is one of those things where when people get into scarcity, what do? They cut
Yep.
marketing. They're like, oh, that's a nice to have. It's not a need to
Yep.
have. But realistically, it's a need to have, because if you start marketing, or if you stop marketing and you take your foot off the pedal, you're starting to lose some
Yep.
ground there. You're starting to lose some momentum. And this is a great opportunity for you to, number one, learn more about marketing. So if there's things about marketing that are just confusing to you, look at some of the different resources that are available. Like I think about, it's not like ClickFunnels needs any more
Yeah.
promotion, or Russell Brunson needs any more like people advocating for
Yep.
him in the marketing space. But honestly, like if you look at Expert Secrets and shoot, now I can't remember, Billy, what's the first book that he wrote
The
before Expert Secrets?
What was it? Website is something else secrets, right? Weren't they all .com secrets, I
Yeah.
think, or something, right?
Dot
Yep.
com secrets, right? Dot com secrets was the other one, and then he just had a book came out, Traffic
Yeah.
Secrets. I haven't read Traffic Secrets yet, but the first two books I thought were excellent marketing
Yeah.
books. I mean, they're really
They are.
good, and so those are really good marketing books, just teaching you about the mindset of marketing, how to market. Claude Hopkins wrote a book 100 years ago called My Life in Advertising, Scientific Advertising. That it's interesting to read that 100 years ago, and it reminds me of Roy Williams, who said that the reason why history repeats itself is we forget the lesson from the first
Mhm.
time, right? And so we read all this stuff from Claude Hopkins and stuff that he was doing in marketing, like really in the early 1900s, right before the
Yeah.
Depression, and you think, oh my gosh, like this stuff is things that we thought was brand new like 10 years
Yep.
ago. We're like, oh, this is so amazing. Who is giving free offers and
Yeah.
doing stuff like that? Oh, Claude Hopkins was 100 years ago. So that's a really good book on marketing, just kind of going through that. Roy Williams has a trilogy of marketing books called Secrets of the Wizard of
Mhm.
Ads. He's got 3 volumes of that. I personally love Roy Williams. I love his stuff. I love the way he thinks about marketing and advertising to really speak to, the emotional felt need that is behind the logic that we typically give to people around marketing. But this is a good time to just dive into some of those books and resources and educate yourself on marketing. Start thinking about, how do I really want to market when I'm really hitting the market hard with, mailers and things like that, because you may not be doing that now. What do I want to do with that? How do I want to present it? What's my message? There's just a lot of things that we can dive into as a business owner that we just, we when we don't have time to really dive into this because we're doing the work for our clients or patients or customers that we normally do, we just forget about that kind of stuff
Mhm.
altogether. So this is an opportunity for you to learn marketing, dive into what kind of marketing do you want to do, and what's your message? What are the best channels that you want to start putting your, message out there with? What's the kind of content that you want to create to educate your marketplace on what you do? Because most people are not educated about what your industry does as uniquely as you
Mhm.
are. And this is where another great marketing book is Made to Stick by Chip and Dan
Yeah.
Heath. They talk about the curse of knowledge. So all entrepreneurs suffer from the curse of knowledge because what we do is so natural and ingrained in our daily behavior. We just look at it as something like breathing,
Yep.
but for someone else, they don't know it. They've never heard it before. They've never seen it before. And this is an opportunity for you to educate them and make them aware of some of those things that we take for granted as entrepreneurs. So, man, I could spend like seriously like 2 hours talking about this, but that is just the start of just one thing that I think would be really helpful during this time.
How do you think the messaging, so I guess first of all, the context here. So 100% agree. What's interesting is that when the climb gets tough, to turn off the momentum. I mean, if you want to make it up, like you're riding a bike and you come down one hill and things are great and you're jamming along, you need to climb the next one. The last thing you want to do is pump the brakes and like slam on your brakes. Like the odd, you're not going to get very far. And then when you do finally restart pedaling, it's going to be a slog, right? The more momentum you can
Yep.
carry up that next hill or that next challenge, the better. And that's what's so interesting with that is it's like, if say clients or customers or whatever are automatic because the things are just hopping, the economy, the demand's there, boom boom boom, all of a sudden things start to shrivel up, and so you say, let's stop marketing the one thing that could potentially bring in new people, when it's not automatic anymore, right? So it's like when it's automatic, man, I mean, you don't even, that's when you really almost don't need to market, frankly. But
Yeah.
it's not that you
Right.
shouldn't. You should, always be marketing to a degree, but it's like, it's funny that we have this reaction, like, let's turn off marketing now that we need it more than ever, now that the foot
Yep.
traffic no longer exists. I'm like, so there's businesses that are still open, there's just no more like automatic foot traffic. So now you need to be proactive in getting getting someone's attention, and reminding them, of the need that you're addressing. And so it's like, you can't do that. It's no longer automatic foot traffic. Now you need to be proactive. Now you need to market, and it becomes that much more important. So that being the context there, what about messaging? What are your thoughts on? Because this is what else I find interesting is you can't necessarily just market the same way you always have, or at least anytime. Frankly, you should be adjusting your marketing semi-frequently. I mean, obviously, we get kind of complacent to a degree, but how do you think messaging adjusts in time? And like, or even being specific to right now, how should a business message with that? How do you feel like that changes? If you can be generic with it.
Oh man, I mean, this is where empathy comes in, right? Because I think to be a good marketer, you really have to have empathy for your end user and the message that you put out there. So if you're tone deaf, and I'll give you an example of this. So this just happened to me, um, like a couple of weeks ago. Um, I had missed my payment, and this is going to sound like first world problems, like uh, even white people problems. So I'm not feeling sorry for myself, okay, when I tell you this story. But I got an invoice from my country club that said I had missed my payment from last month, okay, and for some reason I thought I'd paid it. So I go back and I look at my records. Is this true? Oh my gosh, it is. But it wasn't that they emailed me to remind me that. It was the message that I got literally like it was 2 days ago that was so tone deaf to the situation. Not once did the message that I got ask me, hey, are you doing okay, Mr. Allen? We know that there's a lot of things going on in today's market that are uncertain. Are you okay?
Yeah.
No one asked me that. It was just, hey, this is the deal. And this is what we're seeing. If you don't take care of this, then we're going to suspend your account on this date and we're going to send you a notice that that is the case, right? And I thought, oh my gosh, I said, I'm not opposed to seeing that kind of a message, but I'm wondering, is this the message that every member of the club is getting who are legitimately going through some financial
Yeah.
hardships, which no doubt some of the members probably are when their account goes past due? I thought, man, that was just a really, it was such a cold and impersonal way of handling the situation. I thought, wow. And if we think about marketing, everything that we do is marketing, because when we talk about total experience design, everything that we do is marketing. And so when we send someone a bill for something, or when we send them a payment reminder, that's marketing. That's building a connection. That's building a bridge. And you can't do that if you don't have empathy. And what I felt like is that person really didn't care about me in that situation. They were just like, pay your dues or else this. Now, here's the irony. I think the golf club is open right now for golf, but by and large, all the rest of the facilities at the club are you can't even utilize. So it's like, okay, so not only are you do I not have access to the amenities of the club, or at least the full amenities, but now you're busting my chops about paying this or being on time with this particular with my bill. And so it just the whole thing just seems so tone deaf. So I think, Billy, really the message is just thinking about your end user. What do they need, right? If you're a dentist, obviously your patients can't come in. But what you can do is send regular updates just to check in, give them things they can do at home.
Yeah.
If they're worried about, like, let's say they're past due for a cleaning. Let's say they had a cleaning due in April. Now that hygiene visit isn't going to happen. What are some things that you can educate your people on doing? Because there are people who legitimately care about their oral health that want to know, like, how do I take care of that? Because now it's like the longer you go without your hygiene visit, the more you start to worry. I'm like, am I going to get a cavity? Or are my gums healthy? All this kind of stuff. How can you educate people just on, hey, here's some things that you can do to really take extra good care of your oral health while you're missing your visits here. And, like for a lot of people, it's like, how do we reduce stress if you're in healthcare? Because a lot of people are stressed out right now. And so we're seeing that. So it's just, how do we put ourselves in people's shoes? Like for us, I know a lot of people have uncertainty because this is like completely shut down commerce as we know it. And we don't know when that's going to stop. We have some hopes on when we think it'll end. So what do we do in our end is we look at how do we put people's minds at ease? How do we be a support for people, where they may need some support, where they may need other solutions, where they may need just information on how to manage things correctly. And so that's where we're here. And we want to put messages out there that allow people to feel like, hey, I've got the right support. That's why not only did we do a podcast on business financial planning, we also did a webinar on business financial planning recently, because we know, what are people stressed out about right now? It's money. And so we want to just be really intentional about meeting people where they're at and empathizing with their situation. Now that's easy for us too, because we're business owners. So some of the things that you're going through, we're going through also. So it's just, but when we're not good at that, the things that we put out to the marketplace can come off as really tone deaf and not relevant to the situation. And so we want to be really careful with that. Now, a great example of this, right, Billy, is, I don't think you play on social media as much as I do. So I waste more time than you do, is what I'm trying to say. And so like when I think about Twitter or Instagram and you see like people out there and saying like, hey, come on, guys, like we can do this. It's just a couple of weeks, and they're celebrities, right? And they're in their like 8,000 square foot home with their pool in the back and all this stuff, right? Their indoor basketball court, and they're telling people like, hang in there. And the backlash from that was people were like, hey, Screw you,
Yeah.
celebrity, rich person who has all this money, who's not worried about
Yep.
money. They're not worried about things to do, that
Yeah.
kind of thing, because, they're relatively
Yeah.
insulated from that stuff. So it fell on deaf ears and people didn't appreciate it. And we saw on Twitter and Instagram and different platforms that people had a lot of backlash towards celebrities for trying to give them a pep
Yeah.
talk and tell them, hey, don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. People are like, hey, when you're hurting too, this is what's going to happen. People are like, hey, screw
Yeah.
you.
Yep.
Don't tell me what to do. You're not in the situation that I'm in. So I think it's just really being empathetic to, the people that are hurting and what their real needs are. And then marketing, offering, not necessarily marketing. And this is where marketing can just be just advice. It could be tips. It can be support, just someone who's there for
Yep.
you while you're going through a tough
Well,
time.
it's not always direct, right? Direct marketing is
Yeah.
that's where people often think about, and that's the easiest to measure ROI. That's where it's like, I said, come in and visit me, and you did, and I know I made money by that investment. And we all love that kind because it's easy to measure. You put a buck in, you're getting a couple of bucks out. It's the indirect marketing that obviously comes to the forefront in situations like this, but it also becomes so hugely valuable, and
Yeah.
that's exactly it. Your messaging, especially if you're in a situation where you hardly can direct market at all. I mean, if you're in a business that is literally has to close its doors temporarily, it's a different game. And so you're forced to start thinking about that. But that's exactly what you need to do. You need to stay top of mind. You need to be in those conversations. And this is a lesson that goes beyond this particular crisis. As you mentioned, just showing empathy in general is a powerful principle that will pay in marketing over and over again, regardless of the economic climate. Because as it moves and adjusts, you will, because you are empathetic to it. You're understanding what people are going through. You're understanding the change in needs, and that's one of the big pieces. Is sometimes the message flips. Sometimes it goes from I'll show you how to make another $1 million to I'll show you how to not lose $1 million. I mean, like, whatever the adjustment is, right? You're going to make those adjustments to accommodate what is the priorities of the day, right? So all of us have priorities and challenges and issues we're trying to resolve, and that is what marketing does. It's your opportunity to say, I have an answer for you. Well, right now, a lot of those challenges have changed, right? So that is it. People's challenges have changed, and so your answer needs to change a little bit as well. Not always in what you do, obviously, but in how you're messaging that, because most of our services address more than one issue, right, and address more than one challenge. And that's a big piece of this, is just being adaptable to that, allowing yourself to do some of that indirect stuff that might be more like PR kind of oriented or whatever you want to call it, because it does build a relationship, it builds trust, it builds presence. It will make the direct marketing way easier when you're able to turn that on full, in full tilt. And so it's worthwhile to do and to play with. And you might adjust your budgets. I mean, I'm not saying, like, I don't think it's something where, like, triple your budget for marketing. You may actually, depending on what it is that you're doing, right? You might actually increase your budget for marketing. Be conscious of it. Even our discussions and our training, it's like, be aware of your financial situation. It doesn't mean cut everything and go get your bus pass. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's about just being very aware of where the money is going and what it's doing, and being more intentional with its use. And that's a big lesson that I think a lot of people need to take to heart, because it is an easier expense to cut most of the time, right? I'll just stop all my ads and stop all my stuff. That's one of the reasons. It's an easy expense to cut. But again, you're cutting the lifeline. Just stop breathing. Hold your breath and see what happens.
Yep.
So awesome.
So true.
I think a few other activities, it's a good opportunity right now to think about marketing in a different sense and exploring, like, strategic partnerships and kind of, relationship building, which is interesting considering we have to social distance, right? So it's like, but actually being really conscious of, like, well, who are people that I want to connect with, local businesses or whatever it might be, that we could form strategic partnerships, whether it be right now or potentially in the future. But there are some of these, like, higher level activities that can really pay off, that but they're not always immediate and direct. You're not always, again, it's not always the direct marketing, I'll put $1 in and get 2 out. Sometimes it might be 6 months of development work to build that relationship up. But right now, since we aren't able to direct it as much, it's a good time to explore that or start thinking about those types of kind of business development activities as well, in that kind of marketing vein, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. All right, so one last thing before we get to the last couple sections here. So we're going to start trying out a couple of different sections in this live stream. But what opportunities are showing themselves? Do you have any thoughts on that are showing themselves because of this?
I mean, I think it's along the lines of some things that I've been saying. I mean, I just think opportunity wise, when your business is disrupted in a significant way, it allows you to let go of sacred cows, things that you've always done
Mm-hmm.
because you've always done them. And it allows you the opportunity to look at your business in a radically different way. And I know that's really hard right now because for a lot of people, when we're in fight or flight, it's really hard to, when we feel like we're just trying to survive, it's really hard to put on our creative cap and think about, what is the way that we would drastically change our business or do something different. But when we talk about total experience design, we look at how do we create a business by design versus one by default. And this is where, look, if I'm a business owner, I'm going through every touch point of our business and looking at what do we do differently
Yep.
here? How do we do this differently? How do we do this more automatic? What's the value that we want to create for someone at this touch point? How do we want them to think, feel? What do we want them to
Yep.
see? What do we want them to touch? What do we want them to smell? We want to be really intentional about that. And I think it's just really easy to just let our experience kind of unfold and just happen the way it always happens. But I know for us, like in coaching, there's some things that we're going to do differently for some of the clients that we work with going forward that we just weren't doing before because we were just kind of like, again, I said prosperity is a poor teacher. And so when you're just, you're fat and happy, it's like there's no sense of urgency, right, to change anything that's going on. And it's like, it's kind of like that. You look at like boxing, right? Boxing, I think, is a great analogy of this because when you're early on in boxing, it's like you're hungry, you're trying to prove yourself, you're trying to let people know you've got what it
Yep.
takes. But then at some point you arrive to a pinnacle, right? And you become the world champion. And then pretty soon, you just kind of let things lax a little bit. And I think about like Mike Tyson, who was just such a fearsome, hungry opponent for a long time. And then he got beat by Buster Douglas. And Buster Douglas, if you looked at him, he didn't look more impressive than Mike Tyson, but Mike Tyson took it for granted. He let himself go a little bit. His preparation, his intensity wasn't the same, and because of that, he lost a fight. But that opportunity for a lot of people allows them to take a step back and reassess. Now, not everyone deals very well with that, right? And I'm not saying Mike Tyson did deal with that very well. He didn't. But for other people, when they lose like that, it kind of reignites that hunger. It kind of reminds them that, oh crap,
Yep.
you know what? Okay, I'm in control here of some things. Let me at least focus on the things that are inside of my control and work on my preparation, work on my discipline, that kind of thing, so that I can be more prepared the next time around. And so this is an opportunity for us to do that within our experience, just to map that out and to really do something differently. And so I know that's some things that we're working on in our own business for people, some things that'll be coming out in May that will allow for I think us to really create impact for people in a more efficient way, but also in a more valuable way. And those things weren't going to happen when we're just everything's fine and everything's going well and we're growing and everything's just working out really well. We're not as inclined to make those changes. Not to say that we won't, but we're just not going to be as urgent around it, right? It's like how many times do we say, "Oh, I'll get to that tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll get to that next week. Oh,
Over and
I'll do
over
that
again.
next quarter or next year." And it's just like a vicious cycle of things that we don't end up doing because there's no urgency for us to do it. But now there's this urgency here. And I think if you just picked apart your entire process and looked at the technology you're using and how can you be more wise with technology, how can you create better streamlined systems to reduce the amount of touch and friction in each touch point. Because look, I mean, when we think about employee error and things that happen on a repeatable basis, how do I create systems and structures and design that in a way that makes that less likely to occur, right? We have the ability to really design environments that allow people to work at a much higher level, and this allows us time to step back and really look at what that looks like. And that not only helps the employee, because again, internal cultures are the caretaker of the external
Hmm.
experience. So when we design good systems and processes internally, that bleeds out into the external customer experience and allows for your customer to have a very seamless high level experience as a result of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, even beyond, that's one piece is taking a look at your internal processes and really starting to dial those things in. And anytime you stress test your business, I mean that's what we're talking about, right? We're being stress tested, and it's time to find those weak links and improve them and make the upgrade that we need to. I find that externally as well, a lot of opportunities tend to show themselves if we are open to see them. And this is one of the biggest things is oftentimes our products and services, any business may be able to address a new need that is created out of a situation like this, right? So it's whatever it might be. There's various things, like even right now you think about what will be in demand or what people will be thinking about more because of this experience, and then what services and products and things do we have that can help address those needs. And those can be massive opportunities. In fact, there's a lot of companies that were essentially commoditized that can become breakout successes because they see these types of situations occur. So, even thinking about it from our perspective in coaching and consulting, there's going to be more interest in preparedness around this type of thing, right? So it's like people are going to think about, like, how do I prepare for the next situation? And there's opportunity there to help them address that preparation, help them deal with those types of things, whether it be through, what we're doing, but even if you happen to be a product or service company that can deliver that sort of thing, or shifting your business model to be maybe not so, even as a dentist, away from like I do the work, I get paid, to like memberships and exploring those types of things, right? Like, because then it becomes a recurring deal, and then you're not as at risk of when things happen that your revenue implodes because you have an annuity type opportunity. And so there's lots of interesting things that you can kind of experiment with in times like this. You're an HVAC company that can start focusing on cleaner air systems that's going to be, a lot of companies are going to be interested in these types of things, right? Whatever it might be, like how can we address the new needs that are being created right now, and new interest, whether it be through modifications to our business model, through modifications to how our service is applied. I think there's lots of opportunity, and the key is being open to it, right? Being adaptable. And I think there's a lot of us. I mean, if we've had something that's worked so well, so long, especially if it's too long, we get really rigid, right? As people in general, if we've been doing it for a long time, we tend to get really rigid, and we want to force what has always worked. We want to make it continue working, and that's not always possible. So anyway, excellent, awesome. Well, let's move on. And there anything else you want to add there? You good?
I'm just going to add one more quick thing here to this, right? So none of this will make sense. Like I talked about being in fight or flight. Here's the thing about this is we have to take care of how we are doing and who we are being in this if we want to tap into our creativity and our expansion processes. So don't be afraid to, look, if you need to talk to a therapist, if you need to just talk to someone to get some help with stress relief and just to talk through your emotions, just let that stuff out and let that stuff kind of run its course. Because I think a lot of times it's easy for entrepreneurs that what's interesting, I think, is success can come from a real void that people have in their life with regard, there's a lot of different voids that do show up, but I think that breeds some level of success for people. It drives them, but it's not always a healthy thing, right? And so this is one of those situations where it's easy to kind of push that down. But if you find yourself not being motivated to take action on things, or not being excited about maybe exploring new opportunities and things like that, number one, that's okay. But you know what, if you find yourself in that situation week in and week out, and you're not able to kind of progress beyond that, it may be time to start talking to someone about your feelings and how you're doing, and really check into that. Because you won't be as creative as you can be if you don't allow that process to take place. And so that's something that I think is so important for business owners to be aware of. It's like, how is your mental
Yeah.
well-being in this process? Because if you're not good there, then you'll find yourself being very depressed,
Yep.
not really wanting to engage, and you'll check out of the process, right? That's the
Yeah.
flight in us. And when our flight response is interacted, our prefrontal cortex shuts down, cognitive thinking goes out the window. We're not going to be as creative, as effective as we can be. And so if you find yourself in that space, number one, that's okay. Number two, look at what support you need to move out of that state, out of that status, because that is not a place that we can play in for a long
Yeah.
time. That starts to build, stress starts to build on itself, and then you start to have other health
Yeah.
issues, beyond just your own mental state and everything else. So that's just one other thing I wanted to say about that, because I've seen that with clients over the last 2-3 weeks, and it's okay. Just be aware of
Yeah.
that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and even a lot of these things that we talk about are essentially like we're talking about them because most of us, especially in any sort of stressful situation, are not thinking about all of these things, right? That's why we're trying to bring some of these things up, but it's definitely not to play light with the reality that the stress is there and you should deal with it, and it's okay, right? I mean, that's exactly what you're saying. It is okay. That's an acceptable thing. You should deal with it and work through that and be open about it. Don't just bottle it up. And our goal is, of course, to try and support you in taking those steps beyond the stress and hopefully making it a bit easier, right? And as you go.
Yeah,
So excellent, awesome.
absolutely.
All right, so we'll move on to just some closing segments here. What we want to start doing is on a weekly basis. I want to give like some interesting things that we find, discover, book recommendations, all sorts of things of that nature. Just something that might be interesting to people that are watching and listening. So this week, let's talk about some recommended books. If there have been any books on your mind lately, whether you've read them recently or just personal favorites that you would recommend to everyone, and I'll give my
Okay,
recommendation.
so yeah, so there's 3 books that I finished last week, since the last time we did a live cast. So one of them was a book that a lot of people are familiar with, Give and Take by Adam Grant.
Mm,
So I finished that book. I thought, man, just some of the stuff that he talked about with regards to being a giver, but doing that with the right mindset, and then also what it looks like to be a taker and how to spot a taker, and just there was a lot of helpful little antidotes in that book that I thought, just as a leader, you can look at, right? Like, I think as someone who, I tend to be probably a matcher if I was to look at that, right? And so you've got givers, you've got takers, and then you've got matchers, people who, it's always quid pro quo, right? Like, you do this, I'll do that. That way no one's out of balance, everyone's good. And it's just, how hard it is to play in that space. And when you do give your time, and I think sometimes in consulting and coaching, I kind of beat myself up over doing things for people that I don't get paid for, or giving people a deal. And then I think, man, am I just being stupid for doing
yeah,
that? So there's times where I do have a giver tendency. And then I think, man, is that stupid? Am I being an idiot for doing that? And it really gives you some really helpful, kind of well-rounded stuff to just think about, with what's the real value of being a giver, like a true giver,
yeah,
right? Not a giver that gives with strings attached. Because if you're giving with strings attached, you're not a
yeah.
giver.
Giving, yeah,
And we know givers like that, right? And so that, just a really good book. I would check that out. This is a shameless plug for the podcast coming up. I got this book from a publisher recently. It's called No You Can't. Okay, so I'll read this to you. It says, aim low and give up winning for good. Okay, so this is all about how to be a loser. And so Dave Dunseth wrote this. He's going to be a guest on the podcast here
awesome.
coming up. I seriously laughed my ass off when I read this book, and the money section alone is worth reading. I mean, it's interesting that, just some of the quotes that he has around money, and just, um, how that whole thing goes. So he talked about this with investments. He said, if you invest your money, you could lose it all. The market calls it an adjustment, right? We've
Yeah,
had an adjustment here
that's right.
recently. He said, auditors for Enron called it embezzling. You will call it poverty. And all you're going to wish is that you had spent it on something frivolous so that you at least had something to show for it. Um, so, I mean, there's a lot of tongue-in-cheek humor here, and I think it's talking about how to be a loser, but I think it's addressing some of the mindsets that all of us sometimes will carry to a situation that will only lead us to losing. Like we'll never win with that. And so he says some horrendous things in the book that are so funny. So that's a quick read. It's really worth reading. I would even read this with your team because you can see where sometimes employees or team members come up with just stupid mindset things about giving effort at work and stuff like that. It's so absurd.
Yep.
And it's so ridiculous. But when you have it pointed out to you in such an
Yeah.
absurd way, you start to think, oh, you know what? That doesn't sound very good, but that's how I
Yeah.
think about a situation. So that was really good. And then the last one, Billy, you may or may not appreciate this. I don't know. I read a book about women's sexuality. So I just want you guys I want to share this with you. It's called Come As You Are. And so I read it just because, it was something that my wife read. She thought it was really interesting. And I'm telling you, man, I learned a ton, not only about women's sexuality, which I'm not going to profess to be an expert in, but man, it taught me a lot about my own and just like how I engage or what really works for me or what doesn't. Anyway, since we're in quarantine, I just felt like this was appropriate because, one of your activities may be sex because, our activities are
That's
limited.
right.
So if that's one of your activities, I'm glad for you, right? That's a good thing.
Congratulations.
But I thought that was a really good book. And the only reason I bring this up is look, at New Work Revolution, we look at creating freedom and growth for people so that they can enjoy their life outside of the work that they do as well. And so, look, your relationships are one of the tracks of wealth that are really important. So, I think anything that you can read that helps you understand your partner better or whatever could be helpful. Now, if you're not into women, that's not necessarily going to be maybe as powerful of a book, but I actually think you would still learn something anyway. So, anyway, those are 3 books that I read, 2 that are business in nature, 1 that wasn't, that I finished last week that I thought were really interesting.
Awesome. All right, for mine. So of the 13 or 16 books that I read this week, I love how
Good job.
you finished 3 books in a week or whatever that is. Of the books that I'm going to go with anyway, right now, one that I've been a guy that has been one of my favorite authors for a while, and it's really interesting what's happening right now with him is Incerto by Nassim Taleb. So if you're familiar with Nassim Taleb and you may have heard of some of his books, Incerto is the whole set of them. So it's kind of like I'm cheating with one option. It's like 4 books, but books like The Black Swan, Skin in the Game, and Fooled by Randomness. Those are all part of the Incerto series. Fantastic books. Really talking a lot about risk. I mean, that's his kind of profession. He started as a trader and became kind of a risk analyst and academic and otherwise. He's a fascinating character in general, especially with his the vitriol that he will put out towards academia and the ivory tower and government and all sorts of things. So he's really fascinating and entertaining. And if you want to stand up to him, I encourage you to have some thick skin because he's willing to challenge you. But he's really active on Twitter as well, so he's kind of fun to follow that way. And he actually, even right now with this whole COVID-19 thing, it's really interesting to see this. Is this a black swan? Is it not? He doesn't consider it a black swan. What he considers it is poor decision making by people that have asymmetrical risk at play. Basically, they don't have the skin in the game, right? So and so they made decisions because it wouldn't impact them as negatively. Anyway, really interesting stuff. Fantastic books. Whether you're a business person, Anti-Fragile, that's another one of the books in that series, right? So, as a business owner, they are fabulous books to kind of start thinking of risk and opportunity a little bit differently. But even in general, I mean, they're very applicable, very philosophical. To where I think they'll stand the test of time for years to come. even though they may, have certain backing in finance and other things. So anyway, highly recommend those books. The other one that I just finished finally was The Four Agreements, which has been a while. You've read that one as well, right? You read that one?
Oh yeah, Four Agreements is
Yeah,
good.
so
Yep.
I hadn't read it up to now. I mean, it's kind of a classic one, but a really good book. Really, just some introspection to think about how you deal with your relationships and responding and keeping your word and things. It's really powerful, short book. So that would be my other recommendation for today. That I will kind of, and I guess we'll throw a third one out there. This book here, Fix This Next. It's actually not out yet. But we're actually involved a little bit, or at least have an opportunity to deliver this type of solution. So it'll be out on like the 28th. It's very good, really exploring what it is that you need to do next in your business, as opposed to just, I mean, we know there's 1,000 things we need to do, and it's hard to know, like, well, which one is the one I need to work on next, and where are my real weaknesses? And we so often misinterpret that. And that's one of the biggest challenges. We think I need more sales. That will cure this other problem that I have, is essentially what we often do. And so really digging into that and kind of finding the root of it. And it's based on this idea of the hierarchy of needs for businesses, if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But basically, if you don't have certain base needs met in your business, the other things you work on are going to be falling on a poor foundation. So really interesting stuff. Those will be the books recommended. That one will be coming out later, and we'll, I'm sure, talk a little bit more about it in the future. But nonetheless, those are my 3 recommendations. And any upcoming events or anything we need to announce before we shut this thing down?
Yeah, so just real quick too, I forgot to say, No You Can't is not out yet either. It comes out April 20th, I believe.
Okay.
So if you look for that now, you may not find that. So I'm glad you said that about Fix This Next, because if people try to go find that now, it's not out yet. That's an advanced reader copy that I have there. So events. We have Maximizing Mental Capital May 1st and 2nd. This is a client event. You can also attend this event. You can purchase a ticket for the event. If you go to New Work Revolution and go to the events section, you can attend this event. We still have 10 spots left. Now, because it's an event, we're going to do it via Zoom. We're going to do a virtual event. We did this in March with our high-level leadership workshop. That actually went really well. The feedback was really good. And so we're going to do Maximizing Mental Capital May 1st and 2nd. That's going to be a fantastic event. And then I think here in a couple of weeks, if you're on our email list, you'll get notified of when our next BAM call is too. We're going to do another BAM webinar training here in the next couple of weeks. And so be on the lookout for that as well.
Awesome. All right, man. Well, appreciate the time here today. If people have any other questions, comments, concerns, feel free to throw it in the chat. We will be responding to that after the fact as well. And hit us up by email. And yeah, this is another week of My Business World Live, and we will be back next week. Once again, 2:00 on Fridays is the plan. So Mountain Time, 2:00. Be here, and we'll see you then. Take care.
Awesome.